Time for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, this will always be remembered as one of the ugliest days in American democracy. We saw domestic terrorists attack and occupy the United States Capitol yesterday afternoon with the active encouragement of the sitting president of the United States. Can you summarize your reaction to yesterday's violence and what the country needs to do to manage Donald Trump's last 2 weeks in office?
It's hard to summarize briefly, but let me make 4 quick points. First, this was an act of insurrection. I think Mitt Romney said it best last night. He said this was an insurrection against the United States incited by the President of the United States. I can't think of anything worse. I mean, the terrorism against the Capitol of the United States, the People's House, first time the Capitol has been stormed in this way since the War of 1812. I mean, how do you describe it? It was a mob trying to disrupt the processes of democracy. That's an insurrection. You know, we all saw the visions of and the pictures of what happened, but to me, it was sort of symbolized by the attempt to take down the United States flag and raise a Trump flag. You know, this has been a long time in coming because it's been incited by Trump and his cronies for months, but it's also been abetted, aided, coddled by too many Republicans. And I think, you know, that's pretty bad, and they need to pay a price. It's what we saw yesterday not only threatens our democracy, but the other part of it, and I'm not going to discuss this at length, but it's obvious, it just really undermines the standing of the United States of America as a democracy in the world. The second is Trump. He needs to be removed today. He's been inciting this for months. Yesterday, he directly incited this, said he was going to march up there with them. His cronies, Rudy Giuliani and Don Jr., probably were as provocative, even more provocative than he was in some ways. But he needs to be removed. You see a lot of resignations today from his White House. I saw that Attorney General Barr made, you know, said this was just awful, unacceptable behavior. But whether by the 25th Amendment or impeachment, he needs to be removed. He does damage every day, and we've talked about that over the last few weeks. But the damage he can do over the next 13 days, I mean, who knows what he can do? You know, just think about this. Facebook has now banned him indefinitely, and he holds the nuclear codes. You just can't let that go on for one more day. I personally think that Rudy Giuliani and Don Trump Jr. should be arrested today for sedition. The third point is security. I mean, I've never been a big fan of the Capitol Police. I spent you know, more than a decade working on Capitol Hill, but they were terribly unprepared, and their behavior was just abominable. I mean, the idea of taking taking you know, pictures with selfies with the demonstrators, of letting them in. The lack of preparation was just unbelievable. You know, a lot of people have made the case if this were Black Lives Matter, they would have been, you know, they would have been a lot more harsh, and that's probably true. But, you know, they have to be held accountable. I think of the 52 arrests that were made, only, or 47 of them were for curfew violations. And finally, this brings up a larger question of change in the country. And, this country is changing in a way that it hasn't really changed socially since before the Civil War, when we ended slavery. This is now becoming a majority minority country. A lot of people are threatened by that. And it takes extraordinary leadership to lead a country through this kind of period. I hope we'll talk about this in the weeks to come. But that's really one of the biggest challenges that the next President-elect Biden faces.
Craig, would really appreciate your thoughts as well.
Well, it was such an extraordinarily sad day. I mean, we saw images that, just think of it, no living American, actually no living person on the planet has ever seen emanating from the Capitol in Washington, D.C. It's really not on par with anything. And this is a city in which we honor and we respect people's right to protest. People have come to this city for peaceful protests for really its entire history. I align myself honestly with what Al has said. I do think that the 25th Amendment should be invoked. I think the documentation should be prepared and ready to go immediately. If they won't send it immediately, the president ought to know that he's got about a nanosecond if he pulls some other stunt that's disruptive. I think he's lost the right to, frankly, continue in office until the inaugural. Can you imagine this sitting president going to Capitol Hill on January 20th? It's unthinkable. So it was a sad day. I couldn't, someone said to me, you're like a person looking at an accident, you hate what you're seeing, but you can't take your eyes off it. And that's really the way I felt yesterday. A couple other points beyond what Al said, but I know he concurs. There is a complete rupture today between the president and the vice president of the United States, and that's a very dangerous situation. Thankfully, Mike Pence seemed to be in charge yesterday, while Trump was castigating, according to sources inside the White House, his own loyal vice president for this, quote, misbehavior that he let him down, he stabbed him in the back. So you can't have that exist. That's another reason, frankly, for removing Trump from office. It's a dangerous situation. Who do people listen to if he remains in office? This has been a long time coming. We have talked on this program repeatedly about sort of the disruption that the president causes. Nothing's risen to this level, but it's been a long time coming. And I think there are other people responsible. And I would just say, to bring this locally for a moment, there was early in the morning, this Thursday morning, a disruption on the floor of the House, where a member of the House was trying to shout down a colleague on the House who was making a speech. The member that was trying to shout the other one down was repeatedly gabbled by the speaker, who called for order, who called for silence, until a scuffle broke out. This is on videotape. The scuffle was slightly out of camera range, but you could see members of Congress, probably Sergeant at Arms and others, rushing to break up a fight. On this day, after the Capitol had been seized for the purpose of disrupting proceedings, a member of Congress has the lack of judgment, the lack of temperament to engage in that activity himself. That member of Congress is Congressman Andy Harris, who represents us on the Eastern Shore. That lack of judgment and that lack of temperaments, I do think, rises to the question of whether this man is fit for office for another term in office. And that question is being raised all over this community today. But I think we have to examine the way people behave in a moment of crisis, because at our worst, there are some who were at their best. The people who came in who actually did secure the building, the leadership in Congress who came back to go to work to do the job they were supposed to do. They deserve our thanks and praise. But others who were collaborating in this chaos, who embrace this chaos, who can't resist continuing to engage in it at 2 a.m. or whatever it was in the morning, really ought not to remain in public office, in my view.
How do you get rid of a congressman? Is that just simply a recall?
Well, I mean, I guess there are probably provisions for recall. I mean, they could petition, I guess they could send a petition to the House to expel
Right.
him. I mean, it's pretty hard to remove him once he's been sworn in and he's been seated by his colleagues. But the House does have the power to police its own members, so they can expel him. They certainly can censure him.
And they could, he can be removed from committees. He could be basically disenfranchised, but I don't.
Well, Craig raises a good point. In the House, it's pretty hard because Kevin McCarthy's sort of been part of this whole cabal. McConnell's a little more complicated. I mean, he's sort of enabled, but on the other hand, at crucial points, he has stood up. But the caucuses, and I was head of the House Democratic Caucus, the Republican Conference, same thing, has their rules. And one of our rules is that for really, it's more, you can't punish a congressman for his votes, but you can for his behavior in his political activity. Because remember, the caucuses, the Republican Conference, Democratic Caucus, are political organizations. And so the idea of removing his seniority and taking him off committees is clearly within the realm, and there's a lot of precedent for that. I once had to research every instance of that in the history of the Republican and the Democratic side, and for political actions, there are a number of precedents.
I guess we should just move on. And January 6th will go down in history. I mean, not only did we have the raid on the Capitol, but we probably have one of the most revolutionary Senate races in our history, with Georgia decisively putting 2 new members in the Democratic majority. And also we have late yesterday and early this morning confirmation that Merrick Garland will be nominated as Joe Biden's Attorney General. Craig, can you give me some ideas on your thoughts on those things?
Well, it's a momentous change, to be sure. I had the privilege of co-chairing President George Herbert Walker Bush's transition team. Presidential transition involves a few hundred key people in appointed positions, and it's always, the topic of great press attention. The truth is, when either the Senate or the House changes a majority, there are thousands of changes. Every senator today has to look at his or her situation differently. The committees change, the leadership of the committees change, the staff changes, the agenda changes. And while I know there are a lot of Republicans who feel, and maybe others beyond Republicans, but a lot of Republicans feel that it's important to have a split between the Congress and the White House. The fact of the matter is that President-elect Biden will take office with the ability to get members of his cabinet confirmed quickly. He'll take office with the ability to advance an agenda. The margin is certainly razor thin on the Senate, and it's not that much better on the House side, but the change in the thinking and the strategy of this incoming administration have moved tremendously with these elections. I will say this, that given where the country is, the ability of a president and an administration to move without impediments, the likes of which we've seen out of the Senate for some time, I think has advantages for the country. It puts a tremendous responsibility on the leadership of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has now the House, the Senate, and the White House with very big challenges. And we've got to remain realistic, but a lot is on the burden is on their back to prove that with these leadership changes, they can rise to the equation. And of course, they're going to be evaluated and judged in just 2 years with these midterm elections. So but it fundamentally has altered the equation with the election of 2 Democratic senators from Georgia.
Al, you have the last word. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything Craig said. I think, politically, what happened is really fascinating because, uh, as I said a minute ago, this country is changing dramatically. And Georgia is one of the states that really reflects that change. And this is a trend that's been happening over the last really couple of decades. But if you think about Georgia and Colorado and Arizona, but in Georgia and Arizona in particular have been ruby red states. But because of demographic change, and in Georgia's case, the growth of the suburbs around Atlanta that have both become more racially diverse, but also been had a great influx of young white college graduates. The divisions that we see in our country are now being reflected politically. And Georgia is one of those fast growing states. And we've talked about this a little bit before, and I won't go into the numbers, but basically, there are a couple of things that have happened. One is that the Democrats are winning 3/4 now of the fast growing counties in the country, where all of the economic growth, or really are winning more than that, I think. They're winning counties that have over 70% of the economic growth in the country. And, the counties around Atlanta are key to that. The other thing is the country, in the Senate in particular, is now more and more reflecting the presidential vote. And, it's more like a parliamentary government in a sense. And there are 20 states that have voted for the Democrats consistently over the last 2 or 3 elections. And I believe out of those 40 senators, Democrats have 37. And then there are 25, no, they have now have 39. In the 25 states that have consistently voted Republican, I believe the Republicans have 47. And so this country is divided, and that's going to continue, but the trend is toward growth. What Craig said about the change of power in the Senate is right. And I'm glad he went into all the staff stuff because, even the elevator operators will change. But I think the ability to get his cabinet through easily and to schedule his legislation, not necessarily pass it, because the margins are thin, is really important. I think the Garland appointment is really fascinating because Merrick Garland is a moderate. And had the Democrats not had control of the Senate and the ability to confirm him without Republican votes, because remember, he's the guy that McConnell kept off the Supreme Court, I don't think he would have been nominated. And he probably isn't the nominee for Attorney General that the left of the Democratic Party wants. And so what it reflects is Biden's ability to be more who he is, which is a centrist. And I think that's really going to be important. I mean, we don't have time to discuss it today, but I think it's entirely possible that Biden is going to be able to pull together, at least initially, bipartisan coalitions. And his biggest problem may wind up being on the left of his own party because the margins are so thin. I mean, the squad is only 5 or 6 members, but that's our majority in the House. So the Garland appointment is really significant because basically he's saying, I'm going to be who I am and not who the noisemakers in my party want me to be. And so that should help him, I think, work with both parties, at least initially, and hopefully help him pull the country together after the kind of disasters we've seen this week.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much. See you next week.